This is a Film Stories original podcast.
How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to be joined once again by Roger Lewis, who is the author of many a book, including a biography of Anthony Burgess, a biography of Laurence Olivier, Charles Hawtrey. We've already had an episode where we talked about that particular book. And Erotic Vagrancy was his latest book on Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, which we also dedicated an episode to. It's an absolutely wonderful book. But now I wanted to talk to him once more on the occasion of the centenary of Peter Sellers' birth and the reissue of a new edition, a new expanded edition of what has come to be regarded, I think, as a classic in film biography generally, The Life and Death of Peter Sellers. Thank you so much, Roger.
Well, my pleasure to be back.
And I think I often say this is one of the books, this and Erotic Vagrancy both sort of are, for me, not only two of the best books I've ever read in terms of biographies about film stars, but just books in general. You know, they're amazing achievements. So I'm really feel profoundly grateful to have this opportunity of talking to you. The first thing we need to stress, I think, is that this is a new edition of the book. You've got a foreword by Steve Coogan, and you've got an extensive, it's almost about 100-page long sort of afterword, in which you talk about, the making of the film and various other things that have happened since you published the first. But when did the original publication take place?
Well, it first came out in 1994, when I was obviously, like all of us, much younger. But I mean, I was really still full of ambition and hope and excitement for the future. As before I became jaded and horrible and bitter and mad. I really put everything into that book. I was just in my late 20s, really, when I was doing it. And I loved Peter Sellers when I was growing up, particularly in my teens. All those Pink Panthers were all coming out, Return of the Pink Panther and the Pink Panther Strikes Again, and all these films I just thought Sellers was absolutely fantastic. And I always wanted to investigate this strange, mad genius, that went right back to the Goon Show and BBC Radio after the war. And then he became this great international star in the 60s. And then the Pink Panther revivals in the 70s. And I just thought this would be a wonderful subject. So I had to get university out the way and Oxford out of the way and all this kind of thing. And I tried to apply to a comic actor, to an entertainer, all that, the sort of literary biography techniques and the research and that I'd acquired at university when I was taught by a great man called Richard Ellman, who wrote a big book about James Joyce. Yeah, and yes, I wanted to apply those skills, that sort of depth of research and just getting absorbed in the material to a non-classical actor, which was a sort of new thing to do, and you couldn't do that in a university in those days. And so I got an advance and went to Normandy, where it took me about 5 years to write. And if I'd done it quite quickly, the money wouldn't have been too bad, the advance. But because it took so long, that advance got spread pretty thin. And then when it came out in 1994, and the Sunday Times bought the serial rights, it got me up to zero at the bank. And it's been like that ever since, I have to say. It's just surviving on my own, doing these books that just take forever. But the Sellers one, the original edition was 1,200 pages long. And the new edition, even though I've added a lot more to it, it's about 800, 900 pages, because they've reset it. And that meant that the index was all thrown out of sync. So all that had to be redone as well. And I've just not had the strength of mind, really, to go through and check whether it all makes sense. But that also I wouldn't mind too much, because the idea behind this vast book was to have all these forwards and prefaces and prologues and epilogues and footnotes and appendices. And I wanted to sort of create a book that was like a big Gothic castle full of labyrinths and trapdoors, which I thought somehow would evoke the strange mind of Peter Sellers.
It's like Gormenghast of a biography.
Yes, that's the sort of thing I was trying to do. I wouldn't do that now. It's the sort of thing you do when you're young and ambitious and trying to be, show off, really. I don't think I'd do that now. But I think it does suit Peter Sellers. Because he was an extremely strange person.
At what point when you were writing it did you realize, did you go, it sounds like you went in thinking, I like him as a comic actor, I like him from this, I admire his art and his craft and I want to have a look at it. Was there a moment where you went, oh, wait a second, this guy is completely bananas and I'm going to have to change my track?
I was one of the great things I was able to do was go around and interview everybody, and then they've all gone now. It's not as if my research can be duplicated. People like Roy Bolting, and Bert Kwok and Spike Milligan and all the people I talked to. And I was interviewing a man who became a good friend called Wolf Mankiewicz, who wrote the script for Millionaires, amongst other things. He worked on Casino Royale, and he was a sort of operator in the 60s. And he was the one that told me that Sellers moved or shifted from being an eccentric to being a dangerous madman round about the time they were making The Millionaires, where he became obsessed with Sophia Loren, because his character in the film falls in love with the millionairess played by Sophia Loren. And Sellers did in reality. And he left his wife and children, abandoned them, and moved himself into a bachelor flat in central London so that he could become part of that swinging decade. And it was then that people, and Brian Forbes as well, would tell me stories like that. And he did become sort of unhinged, really, by his genius. He was just keeping it all together was almost an impossible task.
There's so many stories in the book which have that sort of idea of him going off the rails, and it's almost like there are so many moments where the hinge bends. I remember one in particular where he's celebrating leaving a house and he has a firework display, and one of the fireworks shoots into, falls over and shoots into the house and sets it on fire. And you have this line where you say he would never live in a street again. And it's a really interesting sort of like, okay, he's sort of like, he's gone into the stratosphere now.
Yes, now it was mansions and villas and electric gates, penthouse suites in the expensive hotels, a yacht, I think he had, called the Bobo. Yes, he stopped being ordinary. And yet those films he made in the 50s, when he was ordinary still, when he was a sort of family man, things like Heavens Above, I'm All Right, Jack, Two-Way Stretch, Wrong Arm of the Law, the Smallest Show on Earth. All he made loads of, well, The Lady Killers, loads of these little films in the 50s, and I think they're wonderful. He is much more than just a character actor. I remember saying somewhere in the book, or having this little sort of comparison with how he was not, shall we say, Dick Emery. He was not one of these sort of television actors. As marvelous as all those people were, Sellers was somehow bigger than all of that. And in the end, and even when I was thinking about him again to do this new edition, I really did think that you have Chaplin in the silent era, and you've got Peter Sellers in the era of sound. And even though you get people like Robin Williams, who were knocking himself out to be the new Peter Sellers, he still reigns supreme as far as I'm concerned. I mean, look at Being There at the end. It's an extraordinary performance, almost mystical. So he on the screen, he was wonderful. In real life, I think he was probably almost monstrous towards his wives and his children and fellow directors and colleagues. He was capricious beyond belief.
Were you a fan of the sort of radio Sellers? Because I mean, if you're looking at the phases of his career, you've got the Goon Show is his first sort of flush.
Yeah, radio, isn't it? Yeah, radio is how it all began. But that was all before my time, though. That was all more my father's era, the Goons. I came across the Goons by having to go out and buy these LP discs, and listen to all this stuff that had come and gone, 20 years before I came across Sellers. But that certainly that vocal facility was wonderful. I find Spike Milligan a bit hard to take. It's all a bit too zany. And Harry Seacombe, he's just one of those variety entertainers. But then Sellers in that mix, it lifts it to another level entirely. His characters are so distinct. It's a sort of radio version, in a way, of Dr. Strangelove, isn't it, where he plays lots of characters in the same film. And I think it always irritated him, or frustrated him, that on film he couldn't have the speed that you'd have on radio. You'd have to spend hours in the makeup chair or hang around whilst they light the set and all this kind of thing. And he was a very impatient person.
Yeah, he wanted the zip of it. I mean, it's interesting that you have Steve Coogan doing the forward, and I think he's coming through radio and through doing voices and spitting image, and there is a sort of
similar,
it's a tried and tested method of there's lots of comedy go in that direction.
Yes, it's a similar trajectory, as you say. It started out doing Alan Partridge on the radio, wasn't it, before he became on television, and then a film spin-off. He got Philomena, which shows, he's a great straight actor, as Sellers was. And he has a similar sorts of ways of being a virtuoso with his vocally. I think The Trip is something that Sellers would have loved to have made. It's a sort of people pretending to be themselves as they just wander around Europe. And they're doing another series of that, where they go up to see the Northern Lights with Rob Brydon. So Steve Coogan's probably the nearest we've got to how Sellers was. But maybe fortunately, he does lack Sellers's should we say, the insane dimension, the destructive dimension.
Yeah, let's absolutely hope so. And of course, there is a connection with him playing Dr. Strangelove in the Armando Iannucci stage.
Yeah, he did Strangelove in the West End on the stage. And it's when that was announced, I thought, well, I'll ask if he'd like to write something about Peter Sellers, because Sellers must be very much on his mind if he's doing Dr. after Strangelove. And he said yes, and he did it, and he was really, really wonderful and very supportive, and he said lots of nice things about my work. So I was, really proud to have him there at the front of the book.
Excellent. And going back a little bit, you were talking about him not being Dick Emery, and I think that's totally, those names haven't really survived. Nobody talks about Kenny Everett anymore, or it's only in a sense of a nostalgia, really.
This is one of the things that worries me about my career, so called, is that by the time I get round to writing about them, they've receded into history and have become footnotes. I mean, whoever have imagined that Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, that now you have to explain to people who they were, and people under 40, I suppose. All the youngsters, they've had no idea who these people are. But other great figures vanish, like David Niven or James Mason. People don't. These are not topical names. And yet all I do all my life is just watch old films with these wonderful people. And I'm always sort of complaining, the reason the modern world, the contemporary world, is so rubbish is that we don't have a Dennis Price. We don't have a Kenneth More. And nor do we. That style of Englishman seems to have disappeared.
Yeah, I think in a way that complaint. I mean, Vince Gilligan, the writer of Breaking Bad, quite recently came out and did a sort of mea culpa as a reason America's in such a bad place at the moment is because there are too many Walter Whites and there are not enough James Stewarts. There's not enough.
That's right, James Stewart,
Capra sort of characters.
Yeah, James Stewart, Cary Grant, those sorts of people have disappeared from the scene. And one would have wanted to emulate Cary Grant, But anyway, they'll survive vestigially in my books.
Absolutely. And I think there is enough of a sort of, you're everything is a niche of a niche, I think, at the moment. So the thing is to do that niche as well as possible. Speaking as a podcast host that is dedicated to books on cinema.
By the way, I think the one person that was a bit like Peter Sellers, and had a sort of strange, dangerous little recesses to his personality, I think would have been Leonard Rossiter. And I never understood, the question was never answered for me, why after Lolita and Strangelove, massive successes, why Kubrick and Peter Sellers never got together again. It seemed very strange, that. And the comic sort of actor that Kubrick used in 2001 and then Barry Lyndon was Leonard Rossiter.
Yeah.
So he's an actor that interests me a lot.
Yeah, I recently watched The Rise and Fall of Reginald Perrin, which is, I think, is a lot. I was going to say a lost masterpiece. Maybe not. I don't know what other people remember and what other people have sort of stored away in their cultural sort of.
That's the one about the man who just walks out on his life, isn't it?
Yeah, he walks into the sea, essentially.
Yeah. And then there's Rising Damp, where Rigsby, it's a sort of version of John Christie in Rillington Place, I always think, creeping around the boarding house,
Yeah, and the boarding house is the colour of muck as well. Everything's so brown.
It's all mildew, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a very 70s colour, that sort of, ginger carpets and terrible student digs.
Yeah, absolutely. You can tell there's only one bar working on the fire and they're using it to dry their socks.
Yeah, one bar electric fires and inadequate hot water.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm having a bath on Wednesday, that sort of place.
That's right. Yes, people would have to book when they were going to use the ablutions. But that's captured in all those films, and it's instantly the 70s, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's I love it when you're watching something like Casino Royale or What's New Pussycat, and it's instantly the 60s. And there it all is: the design, the costumes, the sets, the celluloid, the way the colours come across, the dolly birds, because they always were that, weren't they, in their short skirts, and the blondness, all that sort of James Bond spoofery that Sellers loved. That was maybe his one miscalculation. He wanted to become a sort of romantic lead, and of course he never was that, really. And it upset him when he failed to have sex appeal, shall we say, on the screen, because those black glasses he was wearing at that period, he wanted to look like the hero in Fellini's 8½.
Right.
Italian suits, and he spent a lot of time in Italy, actually, and made the Bobo there and After the Fox. He wanted that style.
Yeah, it's such a weird lack of self-awareness, really, because the core of his talent is in a sort of ordinariness and a sort of befuddlement rather than a sort of cool and in command that comes with sort of being sexy. He should be someone who's surprised by sex, like Clouseau is.
Yes, that's right. Clouseau is always bewildered by the whole business. I mean, it's a fabulous scene. I saw it again the other day. It's in the very original Pink Panther, and it's a sort of bedroom scene with Sellers and Capucine, who's his wife, who's also having an affair with, I think, both David Niven and Robert Wagner, or their characters, I mean. And it's real farce, in and out of the bathroom and in and out of the bed and underneath the bed and back and forth towards the wardrobe. And Sellers is trying to seduce Capucine, playing his violin. I mean, it's just absolute brilliant farce. The timing is impeccable, and that's the kind of thing he was brilliant at. Or there's another film I liked very much called Only Two Can Play, where he's the Welsh librarian, and again that's a sort of sexual frustration. You can sort of feel that with the character. It's sort of someone stuck in a life that they don't really want to be having, but now it's too late to do anything about it. And these are all the levels and dimensions and layers that Peter Sellers was getting into his performances in little British comedy films. He was much better than you'd ever have expected anyone to be in all these films.
And talking about those levels and intricacies and layers, one of the people who you compare him to a lot, and he compares himself to, he has a sort of ongoing rivalry with, and again, this speaks to him not being Dick Emery, because I don't think Dick Emery would have put himself in this company, but is Alec Guinness.
Yeah, Alec Guinness, I think, was the one person Sellers deliberately tried to emulate, and successfully so as well. They worked together, obviously, in Lady Killers, but Alec Guinness taught Sellers the art of keeping very, very still. And if you look at Sellers, he could just stay in a scene and not move. And so the eye swivels towards him. And Alec Guinness had that stillness. And so Sellers acquired that. Also, Kind Hearts and Coronets, playing lots of roles in a single film. He always wanted to do that, and of course did it in Dr. Strangelove, and also in another film called The Naked Truth, where he plays lots of different people. Oh, and I suppose Soft Beds and Hard Battles towards the end, where he plays lots of different characters. So all that sort of versatility and showing off. But then what happened with the way Peter Sellers emulated Alec Guinness was that he destroyed Alec Guinness as a comic actor. After Sellers came along, Guinness no longer did those Ealing-type movies. He never played those sorts of roles anymore because Sellers was doing them. And so he was in all the David Lean stuff, big portentous epics.
Yeah, he became increasingly, yeah, just he took away that quiver to his bow.
He did. He would just do historical, roles like when he's Charles I in that Cromwell thing. But I mean, wouldn't Sellers have been wonderful as Smiley in
Mm.
Tinker Tailor, or all that circus world of espionage and deception? Sellers would have been made for that. He would have been wonderful as George Smiley.
Do you think Guinness could have played Clouseau?
No, I don't think he'd had the nimbleness.
Mm.
Sellers is wonderfully nimble, and he's a very good physical comedian in that. Um, and he's rather heavier, isn't he? More heavy set sort of actor altogether. Because the part originally was going to be Peter Ustinov, who I suppose later on did his Poirot, didn't he? So he got to play a funny, well, Belgian detective, a funny foreign detective. No, I think Alec Guinness he couldn't have done all that wonderful farce. He couldn't have done that scene I just described with Cappuccini. He couldn't have leapt around the place in all the kung fu fights with Kato.
Mm.
Well, these are other aspects of Peter Sellers. All the funny Chinaman of Kato, Bert Kwok, or blacking up to play the Indian doctor in The Millionairess, and all the Indian voices he used to do. I mean, we couldn't do that now. That wouldn't be permitted.
It sort of comes from that army background, doesn't it? It comes from that, being posted to foreign climes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's a great deal. I mean, the Goon Show really is World War II redone for comedy. It's all explosions and gunfire and Hitler jokes, and all the men in the audience laughing themselves silly. We're all ex-servicemen and Seacombe and Sellers and Spike and all the producers. They'd all been in the war. They'd all known the reality of conflict. They were all in the Western Desert or in Burma, in Sellers's case. And I think Spike fought across North Africa and then Sicily and then up through Italy. So they had knowledge of war and horror and death and explosions, and used that as a background for the Goons, all the army jokes in the Goons. And that does date it now. If you listen to the Goon Show today, it really is sort of comic archaeology. It's not always very funny. You appreciate the genius of Sellers and the zany energy of Spike Milligan, but otherwise, it's of its time, which always happens with comedy. Things become contextual. At the time, you can't see the context, but later on, you do. And that's why, as I said, Casino Royale and What's New Pussycat couldn't have come from any other era other than the sort of 1967.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of those goons, I mean, Spike Milligan was the one that continues to be to some degree a collaborator and to some degree a witness of his life as he goes on.
Yes. There was great competitiveness between those two, and I spent a day with Spike at his house near Rye in Sussex, and he was so sensible. He was sort of one of the people that was giving me all the great quotes to use throughout my book, and he'd also done the documentary with Tony Palmer where he'd spoken the narration. And he'd obviously thought about Sellers a great deal. And anyway, he said to me that when Peter became famous and he was in Hollywood and he had all these contacts and studios were after him to do anything he wanted, he never once said, "Spike, write me a film. Please do me a script. Let's work on a film together." And he was like that with collaborators or rivals. He didn't really want anyone around him that would threaten his throne, if you like. Hence the fallings out with Blake Edwards over who really owned the character of Clouseau. And he was always trying to get the directors fired and someone else to replace them, and all that terrible insecurity that all suggests, doesn't it?
He sort of pulled up the ladder behind him. He climbed to the top and then pulled up the ladder so no one could come along with him.
There's a line in the movie, the HBO film, Miriam Margolyes plays his mother, and she says, "Oh, you should bite the hand that feeds you, Peter, and then people will be impressed by the sharpness of your teeth." So it sort of gratitude was not something he learned to feel.
I know that you talk about it in the sort of afterword to the book, but it'd be good for our listeners to hear, I think, of your experiences of seeing your book, which when I read it, I was thinking, how the heck did they film this? And you kind of refer to that as well in but how did it feel to see that process take place?
Well, it was wonderful because I've always loved behind the scenes stories and how things were made and the making of, documentaries. I love all that, and seeing sets being built and all this money lavished on some wonderful reconstruction of a city or a palace or whatever, and then they tear it down the next day when they've finished with it. Well, that sort of waste that goes on in movie studios, and I love all that kind of make believe, but it is real in for a couple of days before they destroy it. So I loved all that. So I went to Shepperton a few times to watch the filming, and also on location a few times, and got to know some of the cast, and the love and attention and lavish detail that was going into the costumes and the wigs and everything. I mean, for some of the scenes with Sellers in his earlier days, they made these jackets for him, these suits, these clothes, and they'd found somewhere an original bolt of cloth from the 50s. So it was all authentic textiles they were using. I mean, it was wonderful. They recreated the Norman Hartnell wedding dress for Britt Ekland, who was played by Charlize Theron. And I remember the costume designer, Julie Taylor, saying, this one fits better than the original one did when Britt was wearing it. So they'd really studied how things needed to look. But what I particularly loved about the whole film was that my book is a book about someone writing a book. I'm sort of in there wandering around, talking to people, asking questions. It's this sort of gumshoe figure creating the book as I go along, and then coming across the same story but from a different angle. I mean, I just stole all that from Citizen Kane. And what they did for the film is that it's a film about the making of a film. So the Geoffrey Rush character turns into other people in his own life, and the scenery flies off, or he re-edits a scene and redubs it so that he comes out of a situation better. Here's an argument with Emily Watson playing his first wife, and it's all very messy in reality. And then he re-edits it in the booth and the dubbing booth to come out of it better, and he's turned into all these other people in his life. And on the deleted scenes on the DVD, you got much more of this. I think I don't know whether there was a little bit of a panic towards the end, and they tried to make the film seem a bit more conventional than it actually was or is. And there were lots of other scenes where Geoffrey Rush Sellers figure is metamorphosing into the other people in his own life to tell his own story. And then at the very end, we have him wandering through the studio where there's all the junk from the film, all the props and all the bits of scenery are all sort of in the studio. And he walks out and he gets into his trailer. And he goes in, the camera's following him, and then he just looks into the camera and he says, "I'm sorry, you can't come in here," and slams the door in our face. And I thought, well, that's like biography. or a biographer, you can only get so far. You can only penetrate so far into the mystery of these people. And then the door is slammed in your face. They remain enigmas. And I thought it was a great film. It's been shown on BBC once, I think, years and years ago. It's hard to find now. I think my DVD, it was a sort of the Dutch edition, well, hot from Holland. It's worth seeing, really, really worth seeing. And I'm one of those rare authors, I suppose, that loved the adaptation of my book. Most authors moan and groan and say, oh, it wasn't faithful to my book. But this one really was.
Yeah, and it's got an amazing cast as well. I mean,
wonderful cast. John Lithgow's in it.
John Lithgow's in it. Stephen Fry, Charlize Theron, as you just mentioned. Stanley Tucci turns up as Stanley Kubrick.
Yes, he does. It was full of all these people that have become even bigger stars since. It was made just before Monster was released, so I think Charlize Theron would have cost much more a couple of months, later on. And yes, as you say, Stanley Tucci's, John Lithgow plays Blake Edwards. Miriam Margolyes is his mother. What the film does not do at all is have anything really about the goons. And I think there's still a film to be made. Maybe this is what Steve Coogan could do. He could play Sellers and get someone to play Milligan, because the Sellers-Milligan relationship would make a wonderful drama, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there was a whole thing about Spike going to Sellers' house to try to kill him, and
yeah, tried to kill him. They tried to stab each other. It was always like that, and then they would never mention these outbursts again and just carry on. And then there's a marvelous. It's a documentary that Peter Medak made about the attempts to make this pirate comedy on the island of Cyprus, called Ghost in the Noonday Sun. And Sellers was completely off his head during the making of that. And Milligan was brought out to try and calm him down, and was given a little role in the film as a sort of rival pirate. They were all marooned on some desert island. It does exist on DVD. You can find it, but again, when I was writing my book originally, we didn't have DVDs. It didn't exist, or YouTube or any of these things. Now we can find stuff instantly. I mean, I'd have to go to the British Film Institute in London and have these spools of 35mm film that I'd have to feed through a Steam Deck sort of editing desk thing. I mean, it was real legwork had to go into researching it. And finding all these lost films that Sellers had made that had scarcely got released. Ghost in the Noonday Sun being one of them. Another film I like a lot, is really creepy, is called Hoffman, where he plays a man keeping a Shenard Cusack sort of prisoner in his flat over the weekend. I mean, that's a really strange thing. Made by Alvin Rakoff, who died the other day. So these things are hard to find. There was some, I put out appeals in newspapers if anyone had any Peter Sellers material to be in touch. And there was someone who had all these lost films, or some of them anyway, on Betamax. And I had to sort of try and find a Betamax machine to be able to watch these things. Another one he made called The Doc Brief with Richard Attenborough. He plays an old lawyer. And that was really hard to find. But now they're all there on DVD, and they're all easy to find on YouTube. Mr. Topaz, a film that Sellers directed, there's one copy left in the world, which was in the BFI, and that now was used as the source material to create one of those restored editions or remastered editions which the BFI put out. And that's a film with Leo McKern and Billy Whitelaw and Michael Gough. It was made on location in Brittany somewhere. So you can see why the book took years to research and write, because it was a lot to track down and uncover. people to go and see. And
all these strange, all these films and these projects which kind of disappeared or were sort of kept in studio vaults for insurance reasons. I mean, I've watched a few of these films. Hoffman I watched, which I think generically is very difficult to pin down. You don't know if it's sort of like a John Fowles the Collector, or if it's
that,
funny,
isn't it, really?
you know?
Yeah, I thought of it as John Fowles the Collector, and I thought it was extremely creepy indeed. You know, the sort of chap blackmailing his secretary to spend the weekend with him. It was really most odd, and yet it's not played as if it's odd. It's played as if it's a sort of little TV comedy.
Yeah, exactly. So it's sort of like a rom-com that she's supposed to sort of warm to him and see it from his point of view at a certain point. And it's a very bizarre film. And I saw both the documentary, the Peter Medak documentary, and the film Goes to the Noonday Sun, which I'd been prepared for by reading your book. And I found it actually funnier than I was prepared for. I thought it is. It actually works a lot of it, the humour.
My children love it, or when they were children, they loved it. It's and he's really, really funny. It's a brilliant comic performance as this the ship's cook, isn't he? In this sort of Treasure Island type setting, and yet, you know, you read or you get told by Peter Medak what was going on and how Sellers was behaving, and yet none of this is on the screen, is it? The comedy is still full of inventiveness, and yet Sellers was meant to be, you know, one of his darkest phases.
Faking heart attacks to get out of filming, and you know.
I know, he was terrible, wasn't he? Really, because, you know, he had this sort of dodgy doctor that would produce these medical certificates, but you needed in order to claim the insurance for him, you know, very lost days of shooting. And he was terribly ill. He couldn't do this, he couldn't do that. And then Peter Medak opened the paper, stuck back there in Cyprus in boiling heat. And there was a photo of Peter Sellers going to a ball with Princess Margaret, you know. And then on another occasion, he was at death's door. He couldn't be there. He couldn't turn up. And then they saw he was out water skiing. So he just, you know, this degree of shamelessness, really. I mean, it sort of, in a way, perversely admirable. It's like when I was talking to you about Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. I mean, they were so outrageous. They're so unlike any of the rest of us. In the end, you just have to sort of salute it, I think.
Yeah, they're living large, aren't they? And it's, you know, it's almost that sort of like, we've only got one life, so let's
make the best of it. Yeah, I know. It just makes, well, me anyway, I just think, what a timid little life I lead compared to all these people I write about. I mean, I wouldn't like to be them, but I'd like, you know, a day or two, and a bit like that.
But I mean, later on with Burton, you do with the alcohol specifically. I think less so Taylor. Yeah. Taylor seems much more resilient than Burton in the end.
Very resilient. She was really pretty indestructible. Yeah, when you think of all the illnesses she was putting up, you know, she had and she was enduring. But Burton drank himself to death at the age of 58, and Peter Sellers dead at 54. Which is absolutely no age. And to think the career he had and all he crammed into that short life is astonishing. But with Sellers, you can't blame any of it on narcotics or booze or nicotine. He didn't have any of those common vices, shall we say. He just had cardiovascular problems. His father died at a youngish age, and what's tragic, really, really sad, someone that I spoke to a lot for my book was Michael Sellers, the son, who had a very conflicted relationship with his dad. He loved his dad, but he never knew whether his dad loved him back, you know, because it was so strange the way he'd be a very dutiful parent one week, and then he might not see any of them for ages, and just be strangely indifferent and absent. Very painful hearing all of that. And Michael died in, I think, 2006, something like this. But he was only like 53, 54. So it's hereditary heart problems in that Sellers family.
There's a remarkable story about Michael Sellers that you tell that he accidentally sort of scratches his father's car, so Peter Sellers goes into the toy room and smashes his toys to pieces.
Oh, God, I know, that's awful, isn't it? That was told me by several people, that story, and Spike was very upset, and he just, Spike, for all his craziness, was very, very close to his children, and he couldn't believe someone could behave like that. There's a little scratch on his new car, and he just went mad. But he often used to change his cars every week, all the time. Spike said that these cars were like metal underwear, because Sellers kept changing them all the time, every day. But it was the same with cameras. And I'm afraid it was the same with wives and girlfriends. He always had to have the latest, newest model. The next one will be better. He was looking for perfection. And that just created fatal insecurity and dissatisfaction.
He just wanted to unwrap stuff. He didn't want to actually have it. He just wanted that new car smell and that, the possibilities that this is going to be the one that's going to go.
And this will be the one. Yeah, this will be the wife that'll make me happy. Which is what he thought at the end with Lynne Frederick, who sort of thought, well, what that must mean is everyone he's known up till now has to be got rid of, because obviously they haven't made him happy. I mean, that was just a terrible end to his life. But the thing about all these gadgets and gifts and toys and objects and all this materialism, his first wife, Anne, she said to me that when Peter got rich, which he was pretty wealthy by 1960, treats disappeared, because up till then, if they were collecting a bit of Hornby train set, or they'd get a few little bits every week, suddenly you could have the whole lot at once. A wardrobe full of fur coats, and the big fancy mansion he had out in Hertfordshire, a place called Chipperfield. He'd just buy anything instantly, and so nothing was a treat anymore. He didn't look forward to anything. It was all rather a glut. And then when he did buy this big mansion at one point, and Victor Spinetti, he said to me that Peter, when he said, Peter, what are you doing in this enormous place? With grounds and parks and fountains and stuff. And Sellers said, well, I need to have somewhere in case I want to invite Princess Margaret for tea. Well, there we are. He did become pals with the Snowdens.
Yeah, but I mean, again, the crossover with Richard Burton, because they would sort of cross social circles with Princess Margaret and all the rest of it. But Burton quite quickly saw through the royals and was sort of like, oh, these are just ignorant people. These are not. There's nothing special here. Once we've been let into the party, his Welsh working class eye was cast over proceedings, and he didn't see anything worth that was truly different or
well, that's true.
To what he knew.
Yeah. Burton was, well, despite being in tax exile in Switzerland, rooted very much in working class South Wales. They were his values, always were. He was also a great reader, he had great knowledge of literature. In his diaries, he mentions he came across Sellers at some point. I think they spent some time on each other's yachts, and he was amazed at how Sellers really, didn't read books, wasn't interested in culture at all. And then afterwards, I think Sellers must have picked up on that. He sent Burton the complete Oxford English Dictionary as a sort of thank you present for the afternoon. Do you remember when the OED came out in sort of these condensed volumes and with a magnifying glass, so that you could read the tiny print? That's what Sellers sent along to Richard Burton, and they were the same era, weren't they? Well, the same sort of time as making films at the same sort of time with like Rex Harrison and Rachel Roberts and Britt and Peter Sellers and Elizabeth Taylor. And
Burton appears in What's New Pussycat as well.
Yes, Burton does have a little cameo in that, yeah. In Man Up at the Bar. But yes, all these great 60s couples that now you look back and you think, well, today we don't have these celebrity marriages like that anymore, like the Snowdens or John and Yoko and Peter and Britt and Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra and Mia Farrow. These people would make their films and be famous on the screen, and then they'd be just as famous getting out of limousines and going into the Dorchester or the Savoy. With glamour, I think is the word I'm looking for here. Olivier had that when he was married to Vivien Leigh, but he relinquished it later on when he was with Joan Plowright. Became a different sort of actor, a different sort of person. He was another one that was always performing. You never quite knew where the acting was beginning and ending.
But like Sellers, there was a profound insecurity, wasn't there? There's this sort of profound, not knowing quite who he is.
Yeah,
because
the sort of the Lost Boy effect. I thought with Peter Sellers, he was really a sort of Peter Pan figure. He was the boy who never grew up. There's all these tantrums and all this bad behavior we've been talking about. It's like a toddler, isn't it? It's like a child. It's like a spoilt only child who's at the age of, 30 or 40, he's still behaving as if he's 3 or 4. And also in the J.M. Barrie, that's very dark, isn't it? Because it's sort of death haunted as well. It's sort of, and there's a lot of that now with Sellers. When you look back at his films, you can see the sort of ghostliness being there as a sort of ghost film. The Smallest Show on Earth with Margaret Rutherford and Bernard Miles, where they're these old figures in the cinema running an old flea pit cinema. So that, again, was a very ghostly film. And my feeling about Sellers in those early films when he was young, he was playing someone who was old, and yet he never got to be old.
I mean, is there a did nobody punch him?
Well, one person did get completely fed up with him, and that was Joe McGrath. I think Joe is still around. I mean, he must be nearly 100, in his 90s. And I spent a lot of time with him, and he just really loved talking about Sellers. He had endless Peter Sellers stories. He was just obviously the most interesting person Joe ever ran into in his life. And Joe made those not only, but also television programs with Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, in which Sellers is a guest star on a few of those. And then he directed Casino Royale, or one of the many directors of that film. And then later on, another strange thing called The Great McGonagall, in which Sellers is in drag as Queen Victoria. But yes, he did swing a punch at Sellers in a caravan during Casino Royale, and they were separated by the stunt man who got between them. But I think that was just about the only time. Yeah. And it's always a surprise to me that you hear about people being terrible, and why didn't someone actually put a stop to this by punching them in the face.
Not that I advocate
It
violence, but
doesn't happen often enough. It only happens in movies, doesn't it? Only happens in movies.
absolutely. I think, it's yeah, people, except for psychopaths, people are generally averse to violence
Yeah, they are.
and confrontation,
They averse to confrontation and also to all this riotous high living of the people we've been talking about. Everyone yearns to be respectable and adequately insured, and the pension plan in place, and hospital checkups, and healthy eating, and all this sort of thing that the newspapers are full of at the weekend, telling us how to behave. Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, Peter Sellers, they didn't give a damn about any of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so when it comes to his legacy, the work he left behind. I mean, I always have this shock when I'm watching him of really liking him, not just enjoying the films and being entertained and all the rest of it, but actually feeling real empathy towards him. He's a very soulful comedian.
Yeah.
Last night I thought I'll watch a Peter Sellers film that I haven't seen for a while as a way of preparing for our conversation. So I watched After the Fox. And it's got some wonderful moments in it, and he's really soulful. He's got such a,
Yes, I know those big brown liquid eyes of his.
Yeah, he's sort of got like bovine eyelashes as well. It's a really
yes, I know, and in that he does sort of disguises within disguises, isn't it? As he's this master criminal. That was the one they made in Rome. It doesn't Britt play his sister? I think
exactly,
he's very jealous. He's very jealous, and Victor Mature is very funny in it, and the made by Sophia Loren, a great director, wasn't it? Her name escapes me for a moment.
Vittorio De Sica is the director, and actually appears in it as well. He steals the camera from Vittorio De Sica, who's directing.
That's right. Yeah, is he doing the Sands of Cairo or something?
Exactly, outside Rome.
Steals him. Yeah. Yes, and anyway, I think that was part of his continuing Sophia Loren obsession, was to try and work with her favourite directors. So it was part of his sort of Italian era.
Well, there's a joke in it where he pretends to be on the phone to Sophia Loren and refusing her a part in the picture to persuade Victor Mature's character that he's the real thing, which is a kind of like is a joke with a little bit of grit in it, because considering she's the one rejecting him.
Yes, and so much of what Sellers would do would be improvised. He improvised his way through lots of his roles. So he'd have the script, but he'd sort of, like a jazz musician, he'd sort of do variations on a theme. And he hated to rehearse because that would drain away the comic energy. He didn't like doing lots of takes. And the great tragedy for him, tragedy of being Peter Sellers, was that he never knew when he turned up on the set each day whether he'd be as funny as he'd been yesterday, or whether he'd be funny at all tomorrow. He had no control over his inspiration and comic genius. It was just this gift he had, and it was really not something that he was in charge of. He was in charge of him, and that must have been a torment. Not knowing whether he'd be funny tomorrow.
And so what we're left with, really, we're left with the Ealing comedies, the early comedies. We're left with the Kubrick films, Lolita and Dr. Strangelove, which I think are both, Dr. Strangelove more so, but I think Sellers in Lolita is the best thing in the movie.
Oh, yes, absolutely. As Claire Quilty, he's got that sinister dimension, which now, looking back at his films, is one of the most interesting dimensions in what he was up to. That you just wonder why people just thought he was only a comedian, because he was a serious actor in all these films. No, Lolita is quite incredible, and there's a film no one would probably want to make today. So yes, we got those. Then we got the very colourful '60s movies, and then the resurgence of Clouseau, and then Being There at the end, and then the Coda film, very underrated, very goonish film, The Fiendish Plot of Dr. Fu Manchu, which came out after he died. And there are bits in that worth preserving.
Yeah, I was just thinking actually how Spike Milligan held on to that sort of race comedy, if you wanna be kind, longer than Sellers did. But actually, you're right. Fu Manchu is him playing Yellowface in that last thing.
I suppose he is. But I mean, it's really just a homage to all those sort of Christopher Lee Fu Manchu films, or even the Boris Karloff ones, or the Charlie Chan films from the 30s that he would have watched when he was a child. But the Nayland Smith character in that is very touching. It's sort of the old policeman that's now in retirement. They filmed that in Paris. Yeah. The design is fabulous.
Sorry, go on. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, yeah, but I was just going to say that the Fu Manchu, they made it in Paris, and the designer of all these opium dens and Fu Manchu's secret hideaway and all this, all these scenery was designed by Alexander Trauner, who was the great designer for Orson Welles and for Billy Wilder films. Wow. So even at the very end, Sellers was in stuff of rare quality, I think. And a lot of those films we mentioned, few people have ever seen, like Hoffman, or another one he made called The Blockhouse. There's a whole career of Peter Sellers that hardly anyone's ever seen. He's just, to the general public, he's just Inspector Clouseau, isn't he? And that is so limiting. He was so much more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if he'd only made Dr. Strangelove, it would have been. I mean, I personally would rate that as my favorite of his films, because I just think the conversation he has on the telephone with the Russian premier, Dmitri, no, it is a friendly, of course I like talking to you, Dmitri, is just a work of absolute comic genius. And there's a moment where George C. Scott is sort of giving the spiel of what's happened, and you talks about, and it says for the first time that the nuclear weapons have been launched, and he just narrows his eyes like, that's not good. And it's just hilarious. It's just a moment of tiny comic acting.
Yes, and it's such a horrific story about the end of the world and nuclear annihilation. It's only black comedy that is the only genre you could recourse to, isn't it?
And then you've got him playing Dr. Strangelove himself as a much larger character, a much more cartoonish character, and yet still making him Henry Kissinger, basically.
Yes, he is, and the way he's sort of shot in all that menacing shadow, sort of German expressionist character, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you think if he had survived, do you have a feel for the films he might have gone on to make as he entered sort of the latter half of his career?
Well, he was meant to be doing another Pink Panther film called The Romance of the Pink Panther with Pamela Stevenson. And that was going to be directed by Clive Donner, who had done What's New Pussycat. He was going to do a remake of the Preston Sturges film Unfaithfully Yours, which I think did get remade maybe with Dudley Moore, I'm not sure. There were always things coming along he might have done, but as I see it, the trajectory, the arc of his career is what it is. And I called it the life and death of Peter Sellers because he was so death haunted, not just with the heart attack, but in 1964, but also all the seances he went to and tried to be in touch with his dead mother and speak to her from beyond the grave, and all those ghostly little cobwebby films from the 50s, and Dr. Strangelove, where they're blowing up the world and killing everybody. There was a sort of horror film aspect to his career. It was a deathliness was present always in what he was up to. So I think everything fitted together perfectly. I mean, I regret he died at such a young age, but look at what he achieved. I mean, it's incredible career. 50-odd films, then all the radio work as well, and voiceovers and all the thousands of things he achieved.
Did you ever feel that you got inside his trailer? You mentioned the trailer at the end of the film version of the book. Did you feel at the end of that 5 years that you knew him?
Oh yes, I think so. Yes, and I couldn't let him go. I was so besotted with the subject, and so I ended it with a sort of long letter someone sent to me about him. I think she was an air hostess that he had an affair with or something, and she saw the side of him where he was trying to be quite ordinary and sweet, and I thought that I couldn't just leave him there spinning through space like Milton's Satan in Paradise Lost. I wanted to somehow bring him down to earth. So it was a great, a pleasure, but it was also quite scary too, coming back to the subject about a year ago and having to think it through again and catch up with what had been going on in the sort of world of Sellers scholarship since 1994. So it's the life and death and afterlife of Peter Sellers is what we have now.
Absolutely. Do you feel that the way your book has had an impact on how Peter Sellers has been seen is, how has the dust settled on that?
Well, I think people are accepting it now that the dark side was the truth. But when the book first came out, all the Goon Show fans and the people that just wanted to have a good laugh with Peter Sellers, they were all horrified. They thought I was sort of overdoing it, the warts and all, and this was just the warts, if you know what I mean. But I think now people realize that, in fact, it makes him more interesting. Makes him more interesting when you see how he was and what that temperament of his entailed.
And what next, Roger? What are you working on now? If you can talk to us about it.
Oh God, in a way, I'm trying to put together this book. It's called Fog by Tea Time, approximately in the vicinity of Victoria Wood.
Right.
And it'd be about her, but also about the people that created her in a way, like Thora Hird, Dora Bryan, Hilda Baker, Joyce Grenfell, Hattie Jakes, Irene Handel, all these funny women. So it's a book about funny women. And they're all people I'd love to have seen them play the character of Winnie in Samuel Beckett's Happy Days. And so anyway, it's going to be a short book, not these short little pieces shuffled together. So there's that, and there's loads of things. if I live to be 1,000, I won't manage to get it all done.
Is there anybody who you sort of think would be worthy of the investment of another sort of mammoth Roger Lewis treatment?
Yes, though in a way nothing to do with films or cinema, but I think a subject I've never written about ever, never written a word on this subject, but I'd be quite interested in a complete change of direction. And that's the Queen Elizabeth II.
Wow.
I'd be quite interested in writing or investigating someone that had this absolute belief in tradition and ritual and ceremony and duty, and yet also was a mother and a wife and daughter, sister. I quite like maybe write about royalty. I don't know.
Would it be warts and all?
I don't think Her late Majesty had any warts. But that interests me because I think from Elizabeth Taylor to Elizabeth II, it might not be too much of a distance. Interested in horses and dogs, famous from the outset. Everything they did in the public eye, lots of jewelry, crowns and tiaras and fur coats and limousines. Very pampered life in many respects, but you're always being observed. So where's the private, real you inside of all of that?
Yeah.
But there's a great book about Queen Mary written by James Pope Hennessy, and that's one of the best books on royalty. A great biography as well, beautifully written. So maybe I'll try something along those lines. But, well, I mean, I don't know whether you find this, but there's no money in being a writer.
Oh, I definitely find that. I must admit,
terrible.
I flinched a little when you said the word advance because it was like, oh, what are those?
Well, the advance for erotic vagrancy was markedly less than I got for The Life and Death of Peter Sellers in the late 80s. And when you take inflation into account, I mean, hugely, enormously less. And also, I meant to be better at what I do and meant to be better known now. So what other craft or field or profession is there in the world where as you get better, you get rewarded less? And I look at all those people that became lawyers or, business people or whatever. They just can't believe how badly authors are paid. But I think when booksellers take 33% and the publishers take 67%, there's not really much left for the author, is there?
Yeah. I mean, I always had this naive view that if you had a book in a bookshop, then you were living the life of Riley, fanning yourself with £50 notes.
Oh, yeah.
Throwing yachts at each other for fun.
Well, people think, people think that if a book's 20 quid, the author's getting 20 quid. But, you're getting maybe 2p if you're lucky.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, that's all. And I moan and groan about that all the time, as you can imagine. So I keep going with loads of journalism.
Yes, same, and some teaching, of course, and hopefully, if you write a book about the Queen, Netflix might do a series. Oh, wait a second, they've already done that. Oh, damn.
They've done that, haven't they, with The Crown?
Yeah.
But it does show there's a big market for put a member of the royal family on the cover. I thought The Crown was great. I loved it. I particularly liked it when they did. They sort of went off at a tangent, and you'd have Churchill and Graham Sutherland or something.
Yes.
I liked it that it had room and space for that.
I totally agree. I like the fact that they sort of used it as a scaffolding on which to hang stories of more national not more national interest, but things that were more about, it was like a portrait of England and Britain via the Crown rather than...
Yeah.
I remember. It was the one about the guy breaking into her bedroom, Michael Fagan, and
there was. We had a whole episode of that with this chap sitting on the end of a bed.
Yeah.
Which must have been really terrifying. But some of the girl who played the Queen in the earlier episodes or series was really wonderful. Was it Claire Foy? Is that her name?
That's it. Yes, Claire Foy. Yes, I was just trying to think myself.
She was really wonderful. Some of the later ones weren't so good. I thought Olivia Colman was not so good. Prince Philip they never quite got right. But I just loved seeing all the castles and those beautiful stately homes and the rooms and the furniture. That's the sort of thing I love.
Oh yeah, absolutely, totally. And all the telephones are heavy and beautiful music and people wear
those heavy sort of ivory telephones. I just about remember my parents had sort of Bakelite telephones. So it's like a Victorian era now, isn't it? Imagining our childhoods.
Exactly. Oh wow. So well, listen, Roger, thank you so much for joining me for a conversation. I can't wait to read whatever you do next, and you're welcome back whenever you like.
Well, thanks, John. You're such a great host and a supporter of my work, and you one really can't, an author can't ask for more than that.
This episode is brought to you by FX's Alien Earth, the official podcast. Each week, host Adam Rogers is joined by guests, including the show's creator, cast, and crew, in this exclusive companion podcast. They will explore story elements, deep dive into character motivations, and offer an episode-by-episode behind-the-scenes breakdown of each terrifying chapter in this new series. Search FX's Alien Earth wherever you listen to podcasts.